The stars in the Varath expanse did not move. They never did. They just hung there in the black, cold and silent like old eyes, watching everything and caring about nothing. It was the kind of place where ships went when they did not want to be found or when they had no other choice. War Chief Scareth stood at the front of his command deck and looked at the sensor screen. His 6 ships were running in a wide formation spread across 3,000 km² open space. The Voroi did not believe in hiding. They believed in speed, in numbers, and in making sure their enemy knew they were coming. Fear, Scareth had always been taught, was a weapon. Let the prey see the hunter. Let them run. Running prey made for better stories. But the ship on the screen was not running. It was limping. Scareth leaned forward and studied it. A Terran vessel, a freighter by its shape, wide-body cargo pods along the side's engine section at the back. It was moving slowly, very slowly. The drive signature was weak and uneven, like a fire that could not decide whether to go out or keep burning. Its hull showed stress marks on the sensor reading. The ship was old, tired, damaged. Scareth smiled. His teeth were sharp and yellowed from years of dried meat and poor care. He had never cared much about his teeth. He cared about victories. Terran ship, he said. His voice was deep and flat, like a stone dropped into still water. Alone. Yes, War Chief. His sensor officer, a thin Voroi named Drivak, tapped the screen twice. No escort, no support signals detected. Long-range scans show nothing else in the area, just the one ship. And the damage reel, from what I can tell, drive output, is at 30%, maybe less. They are not going anywhere fast. Scareth straightened up. He was tall even for a Roki. He had a long scar that ran from his left ear down to his jaw. A gift from his first real fight back when he was young and stupid. He was still young, some said, but he did not feel that way. He felt like a war archief. He felt like someone who was about to add a Terran freighter to his list of prizes. Terran, said one of his senior warriors, a gray-furred old male named Oro, who stood near the back of the deck. We should be careful. Scareth did not look at him. You always say that. I always mean it. And yet here we are, 6 ships against 1 broken freighter. Scareth spread his arms wide. What exactly are you afraid of, Orok? That they will frighten us with their slow engine. Some of the younger crew members laughed. Orok did not. He just folded his arms and stared at the screen with an expression that was hard to read. Old Roki had expressions like that. They had seen enough bad endings to know that the beginning of a story could lie. Scareth ignored him and turned to his comms officer. Open a channel to the Terran ship. Channel open. War Chief. He rolled his shoulders. He liked this part. The moment before the surrender. The moment when the other side realized that there was no way out. Terran vessel, he said, letting his voice carry all the weight it could. This is War Archief Scarth of the Voroi Warband. You are alone. You are damaged. You cannot run, and you cannot fight. Power down your weapons and your engines. Allow us to board. If you cooperate, your crew will not be harmed. He paused. If you do not cooperate, I will not make that promise again. He waited. The comms channel stayed open. He could hear something on the other end, a faint sound like the background hum of a working ship. People moving, quiet voices, then silence. Then a single voice came through. It was a woman's voice. It was calm, not the kind of calm that came from not understanding the situation, the kind of calm that came from understanding it completely and not being impressed by it. This is Captain Lena Vasquez of the TCS Unyielding Mercy. A short pause. You've made a mistake. There's still time to correct it, Scareth blinked. He had expected fear. He had expected bargaining. He had commanded 32 surrenders in his career, and they all sounded the same. Voices stretched thin by panic, words falling over each other, promises of cargo and cooperation. He had never heard anything like this. He looked at Drivak. Drivak shrugged. Scareth looked at Orok. Orok was still staring at the screen. His arms were still folded. He said nothing. Scareth turned back to the comms. "You are in no position to give warnings, Captain. You have 1 damaged ship. I have 6. Stand down." Another pause, shorter this time. "Noted," said the voice, and then the channel closed. Scareth stood there for a moment. Then he laughed. It started in his chest and came out loud and rough around him. The younger crew members joined in. Even Drevak smiled. "She closed the channel," Drevak said, shaking his head. "She actually closed the channel on us." "Bold," said one of the gunners, or stupid. "Same thing sometimes," said another. Scareth was still smiling as he turned to his helmsman. "Increase speed. Let us go and show the Tan captain just how bold she really is." He glanced back at the sensor screen one more time. The freighter was still limping forward, still slow, still alone. "Signal the other ships. We move in together. Clean formation. I want this done properly. Yes, War Arch Chief." As the Vroi warband began to accelerate, Orok walked slowly to the side of the deck and stood next to the viewport. He looked out at the stars. He had been fighting for 40 years. He had chased many things through many kinds of space. He had learned slowly and through pain that the universe rewarded caution and punished arrogance. He looked at the Terran ship on the screen. It was still moving at the same slow speed. It had not changed course. It had not tried to run. It was just moving forward steady and quiet, as if it had somewhere to be, and was not worried about the 6 warships closing in behind it. Something about that bothered Orok deeply. He had seen frightened ships before. He knew what they looked like. Sudden course changes, bursts of speed, random signal broadcasts trying to call for help. He had seen brave ships too. The ones that turned and fought even when they knew they would lose. Those he respected. But this ship was doing neither of those things. It was not scared, and it was not brave in an obvious way. It was just steady. He pressed his fingers against the cold viewport glass. "What are you doing?" he murmured to the screen too quietly for anyone else to hear. "What are you waiting for?" The freighter did not answer. It just kept moving slow and even through the dark and silent space of the Verath expanse. The Roki ships closed the distance. The numbers on the sensor screen ticked downward. 8,000 kilometers is $6,000, 4,000. Scareth stood at the center of his deck and watched with the easy satisfaction of a hunter who could already smell the end of the chase. The younger warriors were talking among themselves about the cargo, about what a Tan freighter might be carrying, about how they would divide the prize. Nobody noticed that the Tan ship had still not changed anything. Not its speed, not its heading, not even its drive output. Still that same uneven, struggling signature, like a wounded animal that had accepted its fate. Orok noticed. He walked back toward the sensor station and looked at the readings himself. Everything matched what Dre had said. Damaged drive, low power, no weapons lock, no signal broadcasts. The ship was exactly what it looked like, a broken, lonely freighter in the wrong part of space at the wrong time. And yet, Orok had lived long enough to know that when something looked exactly like what it was supposed to look like, exactly perfectly with no rough edges, that was, sometimes, when it was most dangerous. The universe was messy. The real damage was messy. Real fear was messy. Real ships in real trouble sent panic signals and made uneven course corrections and did all the small human or alien things that came from not being in control. This ship was in perfect, smooth control. It was just pretending not to be. He opened his mouth to say something. At that moment, Scareth called out from across the deck. 2,000 kilometer. "Prepare boarding teams. Today we take a Terran prize." The deck filled with the sound of warriors readying themselves, weapons being checked, teams being organized, the energy of a hunt about to end. Orok closed his mouth. Maybe he was wrong. Maybe 40 years had made him too cautious. Maybe this really was just a broken freighter with a bold captain who had run out of options. Maybe the calm in that woman's voice was nothing more than exhausted acceptance. He looked at the screen one last time. The Terran ship moved forward, steady, quiet, patient. Auric decided he was not wrong, but by then, it was already too late to make anyone listen. Inside the TCS Unyielding Mercy, nobody was panicking. That was the first thing a visitor would have noticed, if there had been any visitors to notice it. The corridors were quiet but not still. People moved through them with purpose, carrying data pads, checking panels, talking in low voices. The lights were at normal brightness. The air recyclers hummed at their usual steady rhythm. If someone had walked through the ship without looking at the external sensors, they might have thought it was just another slow day in deep space. Captain Lena Vasquez sat in her command chair and watched the Vroy Warbin close in on her ship. She had a cup of coffee in her hand. It was her third of the day. It had gone cold 20 minutes ago, but she kept holding it anyway, not because she wanted it, but because it gave her hand something to do while her mind worked. She was 44 years old. She had been in the Terran Navy for 22 of those years. She had served on 4 different ships before being given command of the Unyielding Mercy 3 years ago. She had fought in 2 actual fleet engagements, survived 1 ambush, and participated in 6 operations that the official records would simply call classified activity in disputed space. She had seen a lot of things go wrong in her career, and she had developed a very specific skill from all of that experience. She knew how to wait. Distance, she said. 1,800 kilometers, and closing, said Ensign Yuki Ren from the comms and sensor station to her left. Yuki was 26, small with short dark hair, and a habit of tapping her fingers on her console when she was concentrating. She was tapping now. They're running in a standard pursuit formation. 6 ships spread wide. The War Archive is on the lead vessel. Are they scanning us? Constantly, full sensor sweep every 90 seconds. And what are they seeing? Yuki allowed herself a small smile. A very sad, very broken old freighter captain. Vasquez nodded and took a sip of her cold coffee without thinking about it. Good. The truth about the TCS Unyielding Mercy was that it was not a freighter at all. It never had been, not in any real sense. The cargo pods along its sides were real. They could hold cargo, and sometimes they did to keep up appearances during long patrols. But behind the outer shell of a civilian transport, the ship was something else entirely. It was a Q ship, a wolf in old clothing. The concept was ancient by human standards. Centuries ago, on Earth's oceans, navies had taken merchant vessels and hidden weapons inside them, then sailed them into areas where enemy raiders operated. The raiders would see a slow, fat target. They would attack, and then the hidden guns would come out. The tactic had different names in different ages and different languages, but the idea was always the same. Make yourself look weak. Let the enemy come to you. Punish them for their confidence. The Terran Navy had brought the idea into space for exactly the kind of situation they were now in. The Vroy had been raiding shipping lanes in the Varath Expanse for 2 years. They were smart enough to avoid Terran military vessels, but they could not resist a damaged civilian ship alone in open space. So, the Terran Navy had sent one, only it was not damaged. The weak drive signature was produced by a set of emitters built into the engine section specifically to fake that kind of reading. The stress marks on the hull were cosmetic polymer strips applied by engineers who had studied real battle damage and replicated it carefully. Every sensor the Vroy were using told them the same story, because the Unyielding Mercy had been designed from its outer shell inward to tell that exact story. What the sensors did not show was the military-grade weapons arrays folded behind retractable hull panels along both sides of the ship. They did not show the reinforced armor plating running beneath the outer civilian cladding. They did not show the point defense turrets currently locked in their closed housings waiting. And they did not show the 2 corvettes drifting silently in the dark 50-kilometer off the Vroy formation's flanks. Those had been there for 19 hours. Patience, Vasquez said, not to any person on the bridge to the ship. Yes, Captain. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere smooth, even with just the faintest trace of something that might have been cheerful if you listened for it. The ship's tactical AI had been named Patience by its original programming team, and the name had stuck. The crew found it appropriate. VOI lead vessel is now at optimal engagement range. All 3 targets are within weapons coverage. Corvettes are holding position and confirm ready status. How long have the corvettes been running silent? 19 hours 4 minutes and 37 seconds, said Patience without a pause. Lieutenant Commander Oy on the Patience reward reports his crew is, and I quote, very ready to stop drifting. Vasquez almost smiled. Tell him 2 more minutes, transmitted. Sergeant Major Dario O was not actually on the bridge of the unyielding Mercy. He was aboard one of the 2 corvettes, the INS Patience Reward, which had been running completely dark for the better part of a day. No active sensors, no transmissions, no engine burn, just 2 small, silent ships letting themselves drift on carefully calculated ballistic paths, positioned in the exact spots where the Vroy Warband sensors would have the hardest time finding them. 19 hours was a long time to sit in a cold, dark ship with minimal power and nothing to do but wait. The crew of both corvettes had done it without complaint, because they had trained for it, because they understood why it was necessary, and because Sergeant Major Osai had personally promised that anyone who got restless and did something stupid would be cleaning engine filters for the rest of the mission. Nobody had done anything stupid. Back on the unyielding Mercy, Inen Wren was monitoring the Vroy communications chatter. She spoke some Vroy, enough to follow the general tone of what was being said, even when she missed specific words. They're excited, she said, keeping her voice low and professional. The younger ones are talking about the cargo, what might be in the pods. A few of them are betting on it, and the older ones, Wren paused, listening, the one they call Oro isn't saying much. He went quiet after the war. Arkeef ordered the boarding teams to get ready. Vasquez filed that away. A senior warrior going quiet was worth nodding. It usually meant he was thinking, and thinking warriors were more dangerous than loud ones. But it did not change anything. The trap was already set. The distance was too short now for any amount of thinking to help. What do we need them to do before we can move? Wren asked. She knew the rules of engagement. She had read them, but she wanted to hear it confirmed. We need them to fire first. Vasquez said, we're in a disputed zone. Politically, if we open up first, it becomes complicated. If they fire first, it becomes simple. How much longer do you think? Vasquez looked at the sensor screen. Wonder around 200 kilometers. The Vroy-led ship was pulling slightly ahead of the others. The warrior chief was probably eager to be first. Not long, she said. She set her cold coffee down on the armrest. She did not need it any more. Her mind was fully awake now, sharp in the way it always got in the last few minutes before something happened, when all the planning was done and all that remained was execution. She thought briefly about the Vroy Arkeef, young by the sound of his voice, confident. He had 6 ships, and he had found what looked like a broken freighter. And in his mind, the only question was how the glory would be divided. He did not know that the thing he was hunting had been hunting him for 2 years. He did not know that every rating pattern the Vroy used in this expanse had been studied and mapped and used to design the exact bait his ships had just chased for the last 40 minutes. He did not know any of that, and there was no way to explain it to him in the time he had left. Captain Patience spoke again, still smooth, still quiet. Roki-led vessel is charging weapons. The bridge went very still. They are preparing to fire a warning shot. Patience continued. Probability 93% based on charge level and targeting data. They do not appear to be aiming at anything critical. A warning shot. The last step before they demanded formal surrender. The last legal line they needed to cross. Vasquez straightened in her chair. She placed both hands flat on the armrests around her. The crew waited not with fear, but with the focused, ready stillness of people who had prepared for exactly this moment and were ready to move the instant they were told to. The Roki ship fired. A single bolt of energy crossed the space between them and struck the unyielding Mercy's upper cargo section, exactly where it would do cosmetic damage to a real freighter and nothing at all to a military hull. The bridge absorbed the impact without a sound. Vasquez felt it more than heard it. A faint shudder through the deck plating, nothing more. She looked at the sensor screen. She looked at the distance. She looked at the position of all 6 VOI ships spread out perfectly. Perfectly inside the triangle formed by her ship and the 2 silent corvettes in the dark. She smiled. It was a small, quiet smile. Not cruel, not excited, just satisfied the way a person smiles when something they worked very hard on for a very long time finally comes together exactly the way it was supposed to. "That's all I needed," she said. She picked up the ship-wide comm. "All stations," she said. Her voice was calm and clear and carried through every corridor of the unyielding Mercy. "This is the captain. Rules of engagement are met. Begin." The first thing War Archive Scarth saw was the panels. They moved along the sides of the Terran freighter, or what he had been calling a freighter in his mind, pulling back in long, smooth sections like the wings of something unfolding. Beneath them, where cargo pod walls had been, were weapons, real ones, military, mounted in clean, well-maintained turrets that rotated with the quiet, precise movement of systems that had never been damaged at all. Scarth stared at the screen. In the 3 seconds it took him to understand what he was looking at, 2 more things happened. The first was that 2 ships appeared out of nowhere on his flanks. One to the left, one to the right, both close, both already running hot with active weapons locks. They had not jumped in from far away. They had not come from behind an asteroid or a debris field. They had simply been there in the dark, invisible for what must have been a very long time. His sensors had not seen them because they had not been doing anything that sensors could find. No engines, no signals, no heat. Just 2 ships drifting in the black like 2 very patient stones. The second thing was that the tan ship's drive signature changed. The weak, uneven pulse that had drawn his warning across 40 minutes of open space. The crippled engine, the wounded animal, disappeared. In its place was a clean, strong, steady burn. Not emergency power, not a last attempt to run. Just a ship running at normal military output because it had always been capable of doing exactly that. The Scarth sensor officer made a sound that was not quite a word. "Report." Scarth said he was proud of himself for making his voice come out flat. Inside, something cold had settled in his chest. 3 ships, a war chief, the freighter, and 2 corvettes. The corvettes were running dark, completely dark. No energy signature of any kind. "I don't." Drevak stopped. His hands moved over his console. "I don't know how long they were there. They could have been there when we arrived." Scarth looked at the formation on his screen. His 6 ships were spread wide, which had made sense for a pursuit. You spread wide to cut off escape routes, to cover more ground, to make sure a fleeing ship had nowhere to go. But spread wide was exactly the wrong shape for what was in front of him. Now his ships were pointing the wrong direction. Their weapons were oriented toward the freighter directly ahead, not toward the flanks where the corvettes had appeared. Reorganizing would take time, and time was something the Terran were clearly not going to give him. The unyielding Mercy spoke first. Its main guns opened up on the 2 nearest Roki ships. Not the lead vessel, not Scarth's ship, but the 2 running closest in the formation. It was a careful choice, not anger, not panic. It was targeting, selection, precise, and deliberate, the kind that came from someone who had already decided which ships to disable first and in what order. The hits were heavy. The first Roki ship took a full broadside across its engine section and went dark almost immediately, not destroyed, but stripped of propulsion. It drifted sideways out of formation, venting something from its lower hull. The second ship took lighter damage, but its weapons array was knocked offline. It kept moving, but it could no longer fight. At the same moment, the two corvettes opened fire from the flanks. The effect on the Varroy formation was immediate and bad. Ships that had been spread in a pursuit line suddenly found fire coming from 3 different directions. There was no clean angle. There was no position that put all 3 Terran ships in front of any one Varroy vessel. Every turn toward one threat exposed their side to another. On the bridge of the unyielding Mercy, the crew worked. Sergeant Major Dario Osai was not physically present. He was aboard the Patience Reward, directing fire from the corvette's weapons station with the calm, methodical intensity of a man who had done this kind of work for a long time. He was not a man who got excited during a fight. He got quiet. He got careful. He picked his targets the way someone might pick stones from a path with attention and without hurry. "Hit on Vessel 3, said his weapons operator. "Drive section." "She's slowing. Keep pressure on Vessel 4, Oi said. "Do not let her get her nose around." "Yes, sir." Osai watched his screens. The Varroy were not helpless. He had never expected them to be. 3 of the 6 ships were still fully operational, and their commanders were not stupid. They were trying to regroup, trying to find a coherent response, trying to turn the formation into something that made sense against a 3-sided threat. They were not getting there fast enough. On the unyielding Mercy, In Ren tracked everything. Her job during the fight was to monitor communications, enemy and friendly, and to flag anything that needed the captain's attention. She listened to the Roy chatter, which had gone from excited and loud to sharp and urgent. Commands being shouted, questions being asked without answers. The particular sound of people trying to organize a response when the situation was moving faster than their thinking. She flagged one thing for Vasquez. "Vessel 5 is trying to jump." She said they're spinning up their transit drive range. "If they go now, they'll barely make it." Vasquez looked at Patience. "Transit intercept. Is there anything at the edge of the expanse?" TCS Broadwater and her escort group are holding at the transit boundary. The Patient said they have been since the operation began. If Vessel 5 jumps toward the nearest transit point, they will arrive inside Broadwater's engagement range. Vasquez nodded. She did not say anything else. She had known about the Broadwater. It had always been part of the plan. She just let the situation develop the way it was always going to develop. Then things got harder. The 3 remaining Varroy ships, the ones that still had full power and functioning weapons, finally found a response. Their commanders, whoever they were, had stopped trying to reorganize the whole formation and made the only smart decision available to them. They went straight at the unyielding Mercy together at close range, accepting that the corvettes would hit them from the sides, because the only alternative was to keep being hit from all directions without doing any damage in return. It was a desperate move. It was also the right one given the situation. The unyielding Mercy took 4 direct hits in the space of 12 seconds. The first 2 struck the reinforced forward plating and were absorbed. The third hit the port side weapons array and damaged one of the turrets not destroyed, but one gun went offline and the targeting on the other stuttered for a moment. The 4th hit was the worst. It struck near the engine section, not a clean shot, but close enough. The ship shuddered hard. Ren grabbed her console. 2 crew members across the bridge lost their footing. A panel on the ceiling sparked and went, Clear's throat, dark. "Damage report," Vasquez said. She had not moved from her chair. "Port turret 3 is down," said the damage control officer. "Engine section minor hit, no breach. Output reduced to 82%. Hull integrity holding a pause. We have 1 injury. The engineering crewman took a fall from the impact. Non-critical. Get him looked at." Vasquez turned back to her screen. Patience corvette status. INS Old Habit has taken 1 hit to her forward section. Shields absorbed most of it. She's still fully operational. INS Patience's Reward is undamaged. Tell Osai to concentrate on the 3 ships that just hit us. They made the smart move. I don't want them to get another chance to try it. Transmitted. The next 4 minutes were the hardest. Not because the Vroi were winning, they were not, but because determined opponents in a bad situation can still cause real harm, and these 3 remaining ships were determined. They pushed forward, kept firing, and tried to stay close where the unyielding Mercy's longer-range weapons were less efficient. Osai's corvette hit one of them from behind. Tearing through its engine block, it spun to a stop. The unyielding Mercy hit the second one twice in the weapons section. Its guns went quiet. The third one, the most determined of all, took damage from all 3 Terran ships almost simultaneously. Its forward section was hit. Then its port side. Then a shot from Old Habit caught its power relay, and the lights on its hull went out all at once, like someone had blown out a candle. It went dark and drifted. Silence. Not real silence. There was still the hum of the ship, the sound of consoles, the distant sound of someone in engineering talking in a tight, controlled voice about the damage near the engine. But the weapons fire had stopped. The Vroi ships were either dark, drifting, or badly damaged. None of them were firing. One of them, the one that had tried to jump, was gone. Vessel 5 had made its transit. Wren looked at Vasquez. Vasquez looked at the screen. "Patience," she said. "Inform the Broadwater that Vessel 5 is heading their way." "Already done, Captain." Admiral Whitmore sends her regards and says, quote, "We have been waiting for someone to show up." A few people on the bridge laughed. Small, tired laughs, the kind that come after something hard and dangerous when the body is still catching up with the fact that it is over. Vasquez allowed herself a moment, just one. She looked at the sensor screen at the 6 Roki ships spread across space in various states of stillness. 3 disabled, 1 destroyed. One of the 3 that had charged them had taken too many hits too fast, and something inside it had gone wrong in a way that could not be survived. The records would show that it had refused to stop firing. The records would be accurate. 2 had tried to run. 1 had not made it far enough. She looked at the damage report on her secondary screen. 1 turret down, engine at 82%. 1 injured crewman. Given what 6 Vroi warships could have done to a real freighter, it was not much. But it was not nothing either. The Vroi had gotten the range right when they charged. She remembered the shudder through the deck and reminded herself not to let that become a lesson she forgot. "Open a channel to the Roki flagship," she said. Wren's fingers moved. "Channel open, Captain." Vasquez looked at the screen at the lead ship, damaged, but not dead, holding position in the wreckage of its formation. She took a slow breath. "Warrior Chief Skarath," she said, "the battle is over. Stand down your remaining vessels and prepare to receive boarding teams. Your crew will be treated according to Tan prisoner of war conventions. You have my word." She paused. "I'd also like to talk, if you're willing. I think you have some questions." The channel was quiet for a long moment. Then Skarath's voice came back. It was different from before. The flat confidence was gone. What was left was the voice of someone trying to hold himself together while the world he had walked into rearranged everything he thought he understood. "How?" He said just the one word. Vasquez leaned back in her chair. "I'll explain," she said. "It's a long story. But you have time now." The inside of War Chief Skarath's command deck smelled like burnt wiring and something sharper, the chemical smell that came from emergency systems that had been pushed too hard. Half the overhead lights were out. A large crack ran across the main sensor screen from where a secondary power surge had jumped the relay. 2 of his crew members were being treated for burns near the back wall. Skarath sat in his command chair and did not move. Around him, his surviving crew worked quietly, not with purpose, not anymore, but with the careful, slow movements of people doing small tasks, because doing small tasks kept them from having to think too hard about what had just happened. Drivak was running a diagnostic on something that probably did not need a diagnostic. The helmsman was adjusting a course correction for a ship that was no longer going anywhere. Only Oro was still. He stood near the viewport, looking out at the debris and the drifting ships and the 3 Terran vessels holding steady in the dark. He had not said anything since the battle ended. He had not said anything during the battle either, except once near the beginning when he had walked to Skarath's side and said very quietly, without any satisfaction in his voice, "I am sorry, War Chief. I should have pushed harder." Then he went back to the viewport and stayed there. The Terran captain was waiting on the open channel. Skarath had asked how, and she had said she would explain. He had not responded after that. He had sat in his chair for 4 minutes, listening to his ship breathe around him, the groans of stressed metal, the quiet beeping of systems running in emergency mode, and tried to organize his thoughts into something he could say out loud without his voice doing something that a warrior chief's voice should not do. He finally pressed the calm. "You planned this," he said. "All of it?" "Yes," said Vasquez, no hesitation. The damage, the slow engine, all of it was fake. All of it. Skarath closed his eyes briefly. "For how long? How long were you sitting in that space before we found you?" "The unyielding Mercy has been running patrol routes through the Vrath expanse for 6 months. Vasquez said, "We've been trying to draw your warning for the last 3. We've run the damage freighter bait 4 times in areas where your rating pattern suggested you might pass through. Today was the 5th. Skarath absorbed that 5 times. They had done this 5 times, knowing that it might fail, knowing they might have to drift through empty space for days with nothing happening. And they had simply kept doing it until it worked. And the 2 other ships," he said. "How long were they sitting in the dark?" 19 hours. 19. He heard the number, and something in him went quiet. Not surprised, past the kind of shock that makes noise, into the deeper, stiller kind of understanding that comes when you realize you misjudge something, not by a small amount, but by a very large one. 19 hours, he repeated. "My crew's trained for it," Vasquez said. Her voice was even, not unkind, but not soft either, like someone explaining something to a person who asked a real question and deserved a real answer. Cold ship, minimal power, no movement. They practiced that kind of operation many times before we ever used it in the field. "Why?" Skar said. He leaned forward slightly. Forward. This was the thing he actually needed to understand, not the tactics he could see. The tactics now laid out clearly in the wreckage around him. But why? Why build a ship to look damaged? Why train crews to sit in the dark for 19 hours? Why go to all of that trouble? He paused. "You are Terran. Your navy is strong. You have real warships. Why not just come out here with force and stop us directly?" There was a short pause on the other end of the channel. When Vasquez spoke again, she seemed to be choosing her words carefully, not because she was unsure of them, but because she was thinking about how to say them in a way that would land correctly. "Our warships are out here protecting other things," she said. "Other routes, other systems. We cannot be everywhere, and even if we could, meeting a raiding warband head-on in open space is expensive. Ships get damaged, people get hurt, and afterward, the next warband just learns to be more careful." She stopped for a moment. A trap is different. A trap tells the next group something harder to work around. It tells them that the thing they think is safe might not be, that the wounded target might have teeth, that the empty space might not be empty. Another pause. "Fear of the unknown is more limiting than any fleet we could station here." Skarath said nothing. He was listening. "Can I ask you something?" Vasquez said. "You are the one with the working weapons." Skarath said, "Ask." "When I told you that you had made a mistake, that there was still time to correct it, why did you keep coming?" The question landed in the quiet of the command deck. A few of the nearby crew members stopped what they were doing. Drevak looked up from his console. Orok turned slightly from the viewport. Skarath thought about it. Honestly, he owed that much to the question. "Because you had 1 ship," he said, "and we had 6 and the ship looked broken." He paused. "And because backing away from a damaged Terran freighter in front of my crew would have meant something about me, about my command." "It would have looked like fear," Vasquez said. "Yes, even if it was actually intelligence. Scareth had nothing to say to that, so he said nothing. Vasquez spoke again, and her voice shifted, not colder, but slower, more deliberate, as if she had been waiting to say this part and was being careful to say it correctly. "I am going to tell you something about my people," she said. "Not to insult you, not to show off, because you asked how. And the real answer is not about the ship or the corvettes or the trap. The real answer is about where all of it comes from." "Go on," Scareth said. "Humans have been fighting each other since before we had writing." She said, "We fought with rocks, and then with metal, and then with machines, and then with things that could reach across continents, and then with things that could reach across orbits. Every time we developed a new weapon, someone on the other side found a way to counter it. Every tactic that worked eventually stopped working because someone studied it and found the answer." She paused. "We were hunted, War Chief, not by other species, by ourselves. For thousands of years we hunted each other across every piece of ground on our planet. We developed ambushes and counter-ambushes. We developed traps and the tools to detect traps. We built things that looked like one thing and were another thing. We waited in the dark. We learned patience and deception and misdirection, not because they were pleasant, but because survival required them." The channel was quiet. "What I used against you today," Vasquez continued, "was not a new idea. The Q-ship, the disguised fighting vessel, was used on our home planet's ocean centuries ago. Centuries. That idea is so old that the people who first used it have been dead for hundreds of years. We did not invent anything new here in the Verath expanse. We just applied something old to a new situation." She let that sit for a moment. "You chased us because you thought we were prey. But we have been prey before to things far bigger and far more dangerous than your warband, and we are still here. That is what you walked into, not just a trap. The result of thousands of years of learning how to survive being hunted." Scareth sat very still. Aura at the viewport had turned fully around and was looking at the calm panel. Now his old face was unreadable, but his eyes were focused and sharp. The eyes of someone hearing something he had suspected for a long time finally said out loud. Scareth looked at his senior warrior. Auroch met his gaze and gave a single slow nod. The nod did not say, "I told you so." It said, "Yes, this is what I was trying to tell you." Scareth turned back to the comm. "You said my crew would not be harmed." He said, "That is correct. You are not going to take them as slaves. You are not going to use them as bargaining material with our elders?" "No," Vasquez said. "They will be kept as prisoners of war under Tartan conventions. That means food, medical care, a place to sleep, and fair treatment. When a diplomatic arrangement is made between your people in ours, they will be returned." She paused. "The same goes for you." Scareth thought about that. He thought about the kind of treatment he would have given a captured Terran crew if the situation had gone the other way. He decided not to say that part out loud. "Why?" he asked instead. "Why treat enemies well? We came here to raid your ships. We fired on you first." "Yes," Vasquez said, "you did, and you lost. But losing a battle is not the same as being without worth. Your crew followed orders. They did what their war chief told them to do. That is not something I punish people for." She paused. "And practically speaking, how you treat prisoners tells the next enemy what they might expect if they surrender. If they expect death, they fight to the end, and everyone gets hurt. If they expect fair treatment, they stand down, and everyone goes home eventually. Even the losing side." Scareth was quiet for a long moment. He looked around his damaged deck at Dravac, at the two crewmen with burns, at his helmsman, who was maybe 20 years old and had joined the war in because he wanted adventure, not because he had any particular hatred of Terran. At Auric, who was still watching him, he pressed the comm. "I will inform my crew," Scareth said. "We will stand down." "Thank you, War Chief," Vasquez said. There was something in the way she said it, Not victory exactly, not the tone of someone who had beaten an opponent and wanted them to know it. More like the tone of someone finishing a very difficult and unpleasant task that needed to be done and was simply glad it was finished. That bothered Scarth more than anything else had. He cut the calm and sat for a moment in the damaged quiet of his ship. Then he said to the room in general, but to nobody in particular, "Get the injured crew to the med section. Power down all weapon systems. Signal the other ships to do the same." He stood up slowly. He was not injured. He felt like he was, but he was not. He walked to the viewport and stood next to Orok. They both looked out at the tan ships. The unyielding Mercy was big up close. Its hull plating was thick and dark, military grade. The weapons arrays were still out, still visible, though they were no longer tracking anything. "You knew," Scarath said, not accusing, just stating. "I suspected," Orok said carefully. "I did not know. What told you?" "The ship was too calm," Orok said. "Real damage makes ships nervous. This one was not nervous." He paused. "And the captain's voice when she told you that you had made a mistake." He shook his head slowly. That was not the voice of someone who was afraid and trying not to show it. That was the voice of someone who was not afraid because they had no reason to be. Scareth nodded. He stared out at the stars. "I should have listened." "Yes," said Orok, "but it is a hard thing to listen to caution when confidence is louder." They stood together without talking. After that, two Vroi warriors looked out at a piece of space that had taught them something they would not forget for the rest of their lives, whatever length those lives turned out to be. The boarding teams from the unyielding Mercy arrived at the Vroi flagship in small transport pods, 4 people each wearing light armor with their helmets up. They were not carrying heavy weapons. They had sidearms, holstered, not drawn. The lead team member at the front of each group carried a medical kit in one hand and a data pad in the other. The Vroi crew on the flagship watched them come through the docking port with expressions that ranged from confused to deeply suspicious. They had expected soldiers, conquerors, people who moved the way victors move, loud and certain, and looking for something to take. What they got was something quieter. The first Tan through the door looked at the 2 burned Vroi crewmen near the back wall and said in careful but understandable Vroi dialect, "Are those the most serious injuries? Can we start there?" The Vroi crewman nearest to him stared for a long moment. Then he pointed wordlessly at the injured men. The Terran medic walked over and started working without any further conversation. That was how it began. Over the next 3 hours, Terran teams moved through all 5 remaining Roki ships, the flagship, and the 4 vessels that had survived the battle in damaged but intact condition. They assessed injuries, provided medical care, helped with emergency repairs to life support systems on 2 of the ships where the battle damage had put air recycling under stress, and took a careful inventory of each vessel. They were professional and efficient. They were not unfriendly, but they were also very clearly in charge, and they did not need to say so. The Vroi prisoners, because that was what they were now, technically, were kept aboard their own ships for the time being. It was a practical decision, as much as anything else. The unyielding Mercy was a fighting ship, not a prison vessel, and holding 40-plus Vroi warriors in confined spaces aboard a ship with limited extra room would have been uncomfortable for everyone. Keeping them on their own vessels with Terran guards at key points and all weapon systems powered down worked better. Vasquez made one personal visit to the Vroi flagship, accompanied by 2 members of her crew. Scarath was waiting in his command deck. Orok stood behind him. The rest of the crew had moved to other sections of the ship, giving them room. Whether they had done it out of respect or because they did not want to be in the same space as the person who had just defeated them so completely was hard to say. Probably some of both. Vasquez came in without ceremony. She was not in full-dress uniform, snorts. She was in a working uniform, practical and dark, with only the small silver indicator on her collar that marked her rank. She was shorter than Skarath, which seemed to briefly surprise him, though he covered it quickly. She had dark hair cut close to her head, and there were lines around her eyes that came from years of looking at screens in poor lighting. She looked to Skarath's eyes exactly like what she was, a working officer who had been running an operation for 6 months, and was tired in the functional, quiet way of people who have been doing hard work for a long time without stopping. She offered her hand palm up in a human greeting gesture. Skarath looked at it. He had read about it somewhere in tactical briefings about Terran customs. He placed his own palm against hers, not quite a handshake since Vroy did not have that custom, but an acknowledgement, close enough. "War Arkeef," she said. "Captain," he said. They sat down, Vasquez at the edge of a console, Skarath in his chair, Oro staying on his feet. One of Vasquez's crew members stood near the door. The other, Ensign Wren, who Skarath did not know by name, yet sat cross-legged on the floor with a data pad on her knee, making notes, listening. They talked for a long time. Vasquez explained the legal situation in plain terms. The battle had taken place in disputed space, but the Vroy had fired first, and the engagement records were clear. Under Terran law and under the General Galactic Conventions that the Tan Confederation had signed, the surviving Vroy ships and their crews were prisoners. There would be no executions. There would be no permanent seizure of their ships. The vessels would be held until a diplomatic resolution was reached. The crews would be transferred to a proper holding facility, which was a Terran station 3 jumps away, where conditions were, she said without particular pride, considerably more comfortable than a damaged warship running on emergency power. She explained what that facility was like. Skarath asked several questions. They were good questions, practical questions about food, about space, about whether Vroy would be housed with other species or separately, about what communication with their families would look like. Vasquez answered all of them directly. She did not dress the answers up. When something would be uncomfortable, she said so. When something was better than he might expect, she said that too. Skarath found this more unsettling than he had expected. He was used to the way power talked with room left in the corners of sentences for things to get worse, with promises that came with conditions attached with the general sense that the person with the upper hand was holding some of it back for later. Vasquez talked the way someone talked when they had nothing to hide and no reason to threaten, because the threatening had already been done and was finished. At one point he said, "You are being very direct." She looked at him. "Would you prefer I wasn't?" "No," he said. "I just did not expect it." "We are straightforward with prisoners of war," she said, "because we want them to understand their situation clearly. Confusion leads to resistance. Resistance leads to people getting hurt who do not need to get hurt." She shrugged slightly. Clarity is practical. After the meeting, as Vasquez was leaving, Skarath said something he had not planned to say. "The ship's name," he said, "Unyielding Mercy. That is a strange name for a fighting ship." Vasquez paused at the door and looked back at him. "It is," she said. "Someone on the naming committee thought it described the mission well. We fight when we must. We are fair when we can be." She tilted her head slightly. "I have come to agree with them." She left. Skarath sat in his chair for a long time after that. 3 days later, a Terran data packet was broadcast on an open galactic frequency. It contained the complete record of the Varath Expanse engagement, sensor logs, communication transcripts, battle data, tactical overview, and the full record of prisoner treatment in the aftermath. It was not sent to any particular government or military. It was sent to everyone. Any ship, any station, any listening post that could receive it, did receive it. Vasquez had authorized the broadcast herself. She had reviewed the data package carefully before sending it, not to remove anything unflattering. There was damage to the Unyielding Mercy in the record, and the death of one Vroy ship was in there clearly and without excuse, but to make sure the record was complete and accurate. She was not interested in propaganda. She was interested in the record being true. The Galactic response came in waves. The first wave was from military analysts. They pulled the battle data apart with great interest: the Q-ship tactic, the 19-hour dark operation, the three-sided engagement geometry. They wrote detailed assessments and argued about which parts were most significant. Some of them had known about Tan-Q ship operations in theory. Seeing the actual data made it real in a way that theory had not. The second wave was from diplomatic circles. The specific detail of prisoner treatment, the medical care, the direct communication from the Tan captain. The conditions at the holding facility generated more discussion than the battle itself had in some quarters. A species that defeated an enemy in a carefully planned three-sided ambush and then sent medics through the opposing ships first was doing something that several species found very difficult to categorize. It did not fit the patterns they expected. The third wave was from the Vroi, not publicly, quietly, through back channels and careful intermediaries. Certain Roki elders, those who had governed the clans for decades, those whose voices carried weight in decisions that War Chief Skarath had always thought of as distant, and above him began making contact with Terran diplomatic offices. The first communication was formal and brief, and gave nothing away except the fact of its existence. The second was longer. The third included a request for a meeting. None of this was public. Vasquez knew about it because she was kept informed by the diplomatic corps as a professional courtesy since the operation had triggered it. She read the summaries and filed them, and went back to work. The day after the third Vroi diplomatic contact was confirmed, she was on the bridge of the Unyielding Mercy doing a review of repair reports. The port turret was back online. The engine was at 97%, and the injured crewman from engineering was back on duty with a bruised shoulder and a story he would tell for years when Ensign Wren came to stand beside her. Captain Wren said to Wren, "I've been thinking about the broadcast." "What about it?" Wren looked at the forward viewport. Stars, the way stars always were, out here still and cold and old. "Do you think it will work? Not just the Roki. Do you think other groups will think twice now?" Vasquez considered the question honestly. She respected Wren enough not to give her a simple answer. "Some will," she said. "The ones who think carefully, who look at the record and draw the right conclusions, they will be more cautious. They will wonder whether the target they are looking at is what it appears to be. That doubt is valuable. Doubt slows people down. Slowing down gives everyone more time to find another way, and the ones who don't think carefully. They will try their luck anyway," Vasquez said, "and eventually they will run into something like what the Vroi ran into, or something worse. That is the nature of it." She paused. "We cannot stop everyone. We cannot be everywhere. What we can do is make the universe a little more uncertain for people who think that weakness is always what it looks like." Wren nodded slowly. She was quiet for a moment, working through something. "The War Archief," she said. "Skarath, do you think he understood? By the end, do you think he actually understood what we were telling him?" Vasquez thought about the conversation in the damaged command deck. The way Skarath had asked his questions, not with anger, not with excuses, but with the careful, stripped-down attention of someone trying to understand a thing they had gotten very wrong. She thought about Orok standing at the back watching, saying almost nothing. "I think Skarath understood that he underestimated us," she said. "Whether he understood why the full depth of it takes longer. That is the kind of understanding that settles over years, not over one conversation." She turned back to the repair reports. "But he is alive to have those years," she said, "and that is the point." Wren went back to her station. The Unyielding Mercy held its position in the Verath Expanse for 2 more days, until a support ship arrived to take the Vroi prisoners to the holding facility and carry out the final damage assessment. During those 2 days, the crew worked and ate and rested in the normal rhythms of shipboard life. Nobody made large speeches about what they had done. Nobody talked about it much at all beyond the practical matters of repairs and records and the formal reports that needed to be filed. On the second evening, Vasquez stood at the forward viewport alone for a few minutes after the rest of the bridge crew had cycled out. She looked at the stars, the Vareth expanse, stretched out in every direction, dark and wide, and full of things that were moving through it at this exact moment, things she could not see and would not see until they chose to make themselves known or made a mistake. She thought about the Vroy elders, about the diplomatic contacts, about the next group that would eventually come through this stretch of space and find a damaged freighter drifting alone. She thought about patience, about the particular human understanding of it, the idea that time spent waiting was not time wasted, that the still moment was part of the action, that the universe moved slowly enough that you could afford to let it come to you if you prepared the ground correctly. It was an old lesson, thousands of years old, maybe the kind that had been learned over and over by people who were no longer alive, paid for in ways that did not bear thinking about too carefully, and handed forward through time and military manuals and strategy papers and the quiet understanding between experienced officers who did not need to explain it because they had both felt it in their own bones. She did not think she had invented anything. She had not. She had only remembered. And remembering at the right moment, in the right place, with the right crew, in the right ship. Sometimes that was everything. She let out a slow breath and turned away from the viewport. "Patience," she said. "Yes, Captain," said the AI. "Set a course back toward the transit point. Let's go home." "Course laid in," the patient said. "Estimated transit time, 4 hours and 12 minutes. A brief pause. "It was a good operation, Captain." "It was a necessary one," Vasquez said, and settled into her chair. The unyielding Mercy turned slowly in the dark, its drive coming up to full power, clean and strong, and not pretending to be anything other than what it was, and moved toward the edge of the expanse and the long route home. Behind it, the stars were still cold and old. They had seen everything. They always did. They did not care who won, but the people in the ships did, and sometimes that was enough.